Sometimes the smallest details carry the heaviest stories. A faded patch on a uniform sleeve, barely visible through years of wear and countless washings, can hold more power than any medal or commendation. For Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, that tiny piece of fabric sewn onto her maintenance coveralls was just another part of her daily routine. Until the day a three-star general stopped dead in his tracks at the sight of it. What Maria thought was an ordinary equipment inspection would unravel a mystery that had haunted the highest levels of military command for over 2 decades. The patch she wore so casually, inherited from her late father's old gear bag, was about to reveal a truth that would shake the foundations of everything she believed about her family's past. In a world where heroes are forgotten and sacrifices go unrecognized, sometimes it takes a chance encounter to illuminate the extraordinary courage that runs deeper than blood itself. The morning sun cast long shadows across the military maintenance hangar as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos methodically checked her equipment list for the 3rd time. Her coveralls, stained with hydraulic fluid and years of honest work, bore the familiar weight of tools that had become extensions of her hands. The small, faded patch on her left sleeve caught the early light, a simple emblem featuring crossed wrenches over a shield that her father had sewn onto his own work uniform decades ago. Maria had inherited more than just the patch from her father Carlos Santos. She had inherited his meticulous attention to detail, his unwavering work ethic, and his quiet pride in keeping the machines of war running smoothly. Carlos had been a civilian contractor who worked on military bases throughout the 1990s, always telling Maria stories about the brave men and women who depended on perfectly maintained equipment to come home alive. When he passed away 5 years earlier, Maria had carefully removed the patch from his old coveralls and transferred it to her own, carrying forward a piece of his legacy. Today was different from other days, though Maria couldn't quite put her finger on why. The base buzzed with unusual activity. Senior officers moved with purpose through corridors that normally saw only routine foot traffic. Rumors circulated among the enlisted personnel about an unscheduled inspection by high-ranking officials from the Pentagon. Maria tried to focus on her work, but the undercurrent of tension was impossible to ignore. Her current assignment involved servicing a fleet of transport helicopters that had recently returned from deployment. Each aircraft required comprehensive maintenance checks, and Maria took pride in her reputation for thoroughness. Other mechanics might rush through the paperwork or skip minor items, but Maria understood that a loose bolt or overlooked warning light could mean the difference between life and death for the crews who flew these machines.
As she crawled under the belly of a UHH
60 Black Hawk, checking hydraulic lines with practiced efficiency, Maria heard voices approaching the hangar. Multiple sets of polished boots clicked against the concrete floor with military precision. She recognized the cadence immediately, high-ranking officers making their rounds. Maria continued her work, knowing that the best way to handle any inspection was to demonstrate competence through action rather than ceremony. The voices grew closer, and Maria caught fragments of conversation about maintenance schedules, deployment readiness, and personnel evaluations. She had been through enough inspections to know the routine. The officers would review maintenance logs, ask a few technical questions, and move on to the next area. Her supervisor, Chief Warrant Officer Jenkins, would handle most of the interaction, while Maria and her fellow mechanics continued their assigned tasks. What Maria didn't expect was for the entire group to fall silent as she emerged from under the helicopter, wiping grease from her hands with a shop rag. She looked up to find herself face to face with more stars and ribbons than she had ever seen in one place. A full colonel, 2 brigadier generals, and at the center of the group, a 3-star general whose nameplate read Harrison. General Harrison was exactly what Maria expected a 3-star general to look like: tall, distinguished, with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. His uniform was immaculate, every ribbon and medal positioned with mathematical precision. But what struck Maria most was the expression on his face as his eyes fixed on her coveralls. The general's gaze traveled from her face to her tools, then to the various patches and identifiers on her uniform. When his eyes reached the small, faded patch on her left sleeve, his entire demeanor changed. The professional mask slipped for just a moment, replaced by something that looked almost like recognition, followed quickly by confusion. Chief Warrant Officer Jenkins stepped forward to make introductions, his voice crisp with military formality. General Harrison, this is Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, one of our top helicopter mechanics. Sergeant Santos has an exemplary maintenance record and has been instrumental in keeping our fleet mission ready. Maria snapped to attention, offering a proper salute. Good morning, sir. It's an honor to meet you. General Harrison returned the salute, but his eyes never left the patch on her sleeve. The other officers exchanged glances, clearly sensing that something unusual was happening, but uncertain what it might be. The general stepped closer to Maria, his voice carefully controlled. "Sergeant Santos, if I may ask, where did you acquire that patch?" Maria glanced down at the worn emblem, surprised by the question. "It belonged to my father, sir. He was a civilian contractor who worked on various military installations. When he passed away, I transferred it to my uniform as a way to honor his memory." The general's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What was your father's full name?" "Carlos Eduardo Santos, sir. He worked mainly in maintenance and logistics support." General Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his eyes studying the patch with an intensity that made everyone in the hangar uncomfortable. The crossed wrenches and shield design seemed unremarkable to Maria. Just another military contractor emblem among thousands. But clearly it meant something significant to the general. "Sergeant Santos, what did your father tell you about his work?"
Maria felt the weight of multiple stares as she considered her answer.
"He said he was proud to support the troops, sir. He worked long hours to make sure equipment was reliable and safe. He told me stories about the dedication of the service members he worked with and how important it was that every job be done right the first time." The general nodded slowly, but his expression remained troubled. He turned to the other officers and spoke in a low voice that Maria could barely hear. "Gentlemen, I need a moment to review some personnel files. Would you mind continuing the inspection without me? I'll catch up shortly." The other officers clearly wanted to ask questions, but military protocol prevented them from challenging a three-star general's request. They moved on to examine other areas of the hangar, leaving General Harrison alone with Maria and Chief Jenkins. The general turned his attention back to Maria. "Sergeant, I'm going to ask you some questions that might seem unusual, but I assure you they're important. Did your father ever mention working with special operations units?" Maria searched her memory, trying to recall specific details from conversations that had taken place years earlier. He mentioned working with some specialized teams, but he was always careful not to discuss specifics. He said some things were classified even for contractors. "Did he ever mention the name Operation Desert Shield or any missions in Saudi Arabia during the early 1990s? A flicker of recognition crossed Maria's face. He did mention spending time in Saudi Arabia, but he never talked about specific operations. He said it was some of the most important work he'd ever done, but that was about all he would say." General Harrison's expression grew more complex, part relief, part concern, and something else that Maria couldn't quite identify. He looked at the patch again, then directly into Maria's eyes. "Sergeant Santos, I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is sensitive information. That patch your father wore, it wasn't just a standard contractor emblem. It identifies personnel who were part of a classified support operation that most people will never know existed." Maria felt her world shift slightly. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand. Your father wasn't just a contractor, Sergeant. He was part of a select group of civilians who provided critical support to Special Operations Forces during some of our most dangerous missions. The work they did was so classified that even their families were never told the full truth about their service." The hangar suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Maria struggled to process what the general was telling her. Her father, the quiet man who fixed things and told her bedtime stories, had been involved in classified military operations? "Sir, are you saying my father was some kind of spy?" General Harrison managed a slight smile. "Not a spy, Sergeant. Something much more valuable. A guardian angel. Your father, and others like him, kept our most elite warriors alive and operational in environments where traditional military support couldn't reach. They were the invisible heroes who made sure our people came home." As the implications of this revelation began to sink in, Maria realized that everything she thought she knew about her father's work was about to change. The patch she had worn as a simple tribute was actually a symbol of extraordinary service that had remained hidden for over 20 years. General Harrison glanced around the hangar, then back to Maria. "Sergeant, I think it's time you learned the full truth about what your father really did for his country. But this conversation needs to continue somewhere more private. Are you willing to hear a story that your father never had the chance to tell you himself?" 2 hours later, Maria found herself in a secure conference room, deep within the base administrative building. The room was sterile and windowless, with soundproof walls and the kind of security features that made classified conversations possible. General Harrison sat across from her at a polished table, having shed the formal inspection atmosphere for something more personal, yet still weighted with military gravity. Between them lay a thick manila folder marked with various classification stamps and security warnings. The general's aide had brought coffee and then disappeared, leaving them alone with secrets that had been buried for decades. Before I show you what's in this file, Sergeant Santos, I need you to understand the context. General Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of years. In 1991, during Operation Desert Shield and the early days of Desert Storm, our Special Operations Forces were tasked with missions deep behind enemy lines. These weren't the operations you read about in history books. They were the ones that officially never happened. Maria sat perfectly still, her mind racing. She had grown up hearing stories about the Gulf War, but her father had always been vague about his specific role during that time. He would mention the heat, the long hours, and the importance of the work, but never any details that might have hinted at classified operations. Your father wasn't just maintaining equipment at a safe rear base, the general continued. He was part of a program called Operation Phantom Wrench, a classified initiative that embedded civilian technical specialists with our most elite units. These specialists were responsible for maintaining and repairing sophisticated equipment in forward operating positions where traditional military supply chains couldn't reach. General Harrison opened the folder and pulled out a black and white photograph. The image showed a small group of men in desert camouflage, standing next to what appeared to be specialized communications equipment in an austere desert setting. Maria's breath caught as she recognized her father's face among the group, 25 years younger but unmistakably him. This photograph was taken at a classified forward operating base, approximately 60 miles behind Iraqi lines in February 1991. Your father is standing next to Captain James Mitchell, who was leading a reconnaissance team tracking Scud missile movements.
Maria studied the photograph intently.
Her father looked impossibly young and serious, wearing the same type of coveralls she now wore but adapted for desert operations. The other men in the photo had the lean, intense look of special operations personnel, but her father fit seamlessly among them despite his civilian status. The mission was supposed to last 72 hours, General Harrison continued, pulling out additional documents from the file. Captain Mitchell's team was to gather intelligence on mobile missile launchers and relay targeting information back to coalition air forces. Your father was there to maintain their communications equipment and ensure they could call for extraction when the mission was complete. The general paused, and Maria sensed that this was where the story would take a darker turn. She braced herself for whatever was coming next. On the second day of the mission, the team's position was compromised. Iraqi forces had detected their communication signatures and were moving to surround them. The extraction helicopter was still 6 hours out, and the team was facing overwhelming odds. General Harrison pulled out a typed military report. Its pages yellowed with age and marked with official seals. This is the after-action report from that mission. It documents one of the most remarkable acts of courage I've encountered in 35 years of military service. Maria leaned forward as the general began reading from the report. At approximately 0400 hours on February 18, 1991, civilian contractor Carlos Santos volunteered to remain behind with damaged communications equipment, while Special Operations Team Alpha moved to alternate extraction coordinates. Mr. Santos successfully maintained radio contact with extraction forces while under direct enemy fire, enabling the safe recovery of all military personnel. The words hit Maria like a physical blow. Her father had stayed behind under enemy fire to save soldiers. The quiet man who had taught her to change spark plugs and check tire pressure had been a hero in the truest sense of the word. Your father's actions saved 6 lives that night, General Harrison continued, his voice heavy with respect. But because of the classified nature of the operation, his heroism could never be officially recognized. He couldn't receive medals, citations, or even acknowledgement that he had been in Iraq. The success of future operations depended on maintaining absolute secrecy about the Phantom Wrench program. Maria stared at the documents, trying to reconcile this information with her memories of her father. He had been brave, certainly, but in quiet, everyday ways. He had never shown any sign that he carried the weight of such experiences. Sir, if he stayed behind, how did he survive? How did he get home? General Harrison smiled for the first time since they had entered the room. That's where the story becomes even more remarkable. Your father didn't just maintain communications and wait for rescue. According to Captain Mitchell's debriefing, Carlos Santos' jury rigged a portable transmitter from damaged components and successfully called in close air support that scattered the Iraqi forces long enough for a combat rescue team to extract him. The general pulled out another photograph, this one showing her father being helped from a helicopter, his coveralls torn and dirty, but very much alive. This photo was taken when he arrived back at the forward operating base. He had been behind enemy lines for 18 hours, under fire for most of that time, keeping our people connected to safety. Maria felt tears forming in her eyes as she processed the magnitude of what her father had done. Why didn't he ever tell me? Why couldn't I know? Because the Phantom Wrench program was so sensitive that even family members couldn't be told. The contractors who participated were required to sign agreements that prevented them from discussing their service for 25 years minimum. Your father took that commitment seriously, even though it meant he could never share his proudest moments with the people he loved most. General Harrison reached into the folder one more time and pulled out an official-looking document with multiple signatures and seals. This is a presidential commendation that was written in 1991 but never awarded because of classification restrictions. It documents your father's extraordinary service and recommends him for the highest civilian honor our government can bestow. Maria read through the commendation, her father's name appearing multiple times alongside descriptions of courage, sacrifice, and dedication that exceeded anything she could have imagined. The document was signed by officers she recognized as legends in military history, validating that her father had operated at the highest levels of military service. The 25-year classification period expired last year, General Harrison explained. We've been working through a list of Phantom Wrench veterans, reaching out to families to finally tell these stories and award the recognition that was denied for so long. When I saw that patch on your uniform today, I knew immediately that you were Carlos Santos's daughter. Maria looked down at the faded emblem on her sleeve with new understanding. It wasn't just a contractor patch, it was a symbol of elite service that connected her father to some of the most dangerous and important missions of his generation. Sir, there's something I need to know. If this program was so classified, how do you know all these details? How do you know my father personally? General Harrison was quiet for a long moment, then slowly began unbuttoning his uniform shirt. Underneath, he wore a simple white t-shirt, and as he pushed up his left sleeve, Maria could see a scar that ran from his elbow to his wrist. I was Captain James Mitchell in that photograph, Sergeant Santos. Your father saved my life and the lives of my team members that night in Iraq. I've carried the memory of his courage for 25 years, wondering if I'd ever have the chance to thank him properly. The revelation hit Maria like lightning. The 3-star general sitting across from her was the young captain her father had risked everything to save. The man who now commanded thousands of soldiers owed his life to Carlos Santos, the quiet contractor who had fixed things and told bedtime stories. I've been trying to find your father for years, General Harrison continued, but I learned about his death only recently, when we began processing Phantom Wrench commendations. I came here today hoping to present this award to him personally. Instead, I have the honor of presenting it to the daughter who carries on his legacy of service. Maria felt the weight of 25 years of hidden history settling on her shoulders. Her father hadn't just been a good man who worked hard, he had been a hero whose courage had shaped the career of a general and saved the lives of elite warriors. The patch she wore casually every day was actually a symbol of extraordinary service that connected her to a legacy she was only now beginning to understand. As General Harrison prepared to show her additional documents that would reveal even more about her father's classified service, Maria realized that everything she thought she knew about her family was about to expand in ways she never could have imagined. 3 weeks after the revelation in the conference room, Maria stood before a gathering that would have amazed her father. The Pentagon's Hall of Heroes was filled with high-ranking military officers, government officials, and family members of Phantom Wrench veterans who were finally receiving recognition for their classified service. The ceremony had been planned for months, but Maria's story had added an unexpected emotional weight to the proceedings. General Harrison, now serving as the master of ceremonies, had invited Maria to speak about her father's legacy. As she looked out at the assembled crowd, she saw faces that represented decades of military history. Some were current officers, others were veterans whose own stories of classified service were finally being acknowledged. Among them sat the 5 surviving members of Captain Mitchell's 1991 reconnaissance team, all now retired but united once again by their shared experience with Carlos Santos. The weeks since learning about her father's heroism had been a whirlwind of emotions and discoveries. General Harrison had connected Maria with other family members of Phantom Wrench veterans, creating a network of people who suddenly understood that their loved ones had been part of something extraordinary. They had formed an informal support group, sharing stories and photos that had been hidden away for 25 years. Maria had also learned more about the scope of the Phantom Wrench program. Her father hadn't been involved in just one mission. He had supported special operations forces across multiple deployments throughout the 1990s. The folder General Harrison had shown her was just one of several documenting Carlos Santos's contributions to classified missions in places she couldn't have imagined him visiting. The most shocking revelation had come from Captain Rodriguez, one of the team members her father had saved in Iraq. During a phone conversation that had lasted 3 hours, Rodriguez told Maria about a mission in Somalia in 1993 where her father had volunteered to repair a damaged helicopter under sniper fire, enabling the evacuation of wounded soldiers. Another team member, now a retired colonel, described how Carlos had worked 72 hours straight to restore communications during a classified operation in Afghanistan, refusing relief until every piece of equipment was functioning perfectly. As Maria prepared to address the ceremony, she thought about how these stories had changed her understanding of her childhood. Her father's frequent business trips, his careful attention to detail in everything he did, his quiet insistence on doing things right the first time, all of these traits now made sense in the context of life or death responsibilities she had never known about. General Harrison introduced her with words that would have made Carlos Santos proud. "Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great honor to introduce Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, United States Army, whose father Carlos Eduardo Santos exemplified the courage and dedication of our Phantom Ranch veterans. Carlos Santos saved my life and the lives of my team in 1991, and today his daughter continues his tradition of selfless service to our nation." Maria approached the podium wearing her dress uniform. The faded patch that had started this journey replaced now by the official Phantom Ranch commendation that General Harrison had presented to her during a private ceremony the previous week. The small emblem represented not just her father's service, but the service of hundreds of civilian contractors who had risked everything to support Special Operations Forces during the most dangerous missions of their era. "3 weeks ago, I thought I knew who my father was," Maria began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's sound system. "He was a hard-working man who fixed things, who taught me the value of doing a job right, and who told me stories about the brave men and women he supported during his work as a contractor." I wore his old patch on my uniform as a simple tribute to a good father and a dedicated worker. The audience was completely silent, understanding that they were about to hear a story that represented thousands of similar stories across the military community. "What I discovered is that my father was part of something much larger than I could have imagined. He wasn't just fixing equipment in safe locations. He was risking his life to ensure that our most elite warriors could complete missions that protected our national security. He did this not for recognition or reward, but because he understood that good people depend on others to do their jobs with excellence, even when no one is watching."
Maria paused, looking out at the faces of the Special Operations veterans in the audience.
Many of them nodded with understanding, recognizing the truth of what she was saying. "The patch I wore for 5 years without understanding its significance represents something profound about service and sacrifice. My father and the other Phantom Ranch veterans couldn't tell their families what they had done. They couldn't receive public recognition for their courage. They had to carry the weight of extraordinary experiences alone, knowing that their heroism would remain hidden until years after their service ended." General Harrison watched from the side of the stage, remembering the young captain he had been in 1991, and thinking about how Carlos Santos's courage that night had shaped every day of his military career since. "Today, as we finally honor these veterans, I want to share what I've learned about the true meaning of heroism," Maria continued. "It isn't about recognition or medals or stories in newspapers. Real heroism is about doing the right thing when it's difficult, dangerous, and thankless. It's about putting the safety and success of others ahead of your own comfort and recognition." The audience included several family members who were hearing these stories for the first time, just as Maria had 3 weeks earlier. She could see the mixture of pride and grief on their faces as they processed the magnitude of what their loved ones had accomplished. "My father came home from his deployments and went back to his regular life, fixing everyday problems and teaching his daughter how to change oil and check tire pressure. He never acted like a hero because he didn't think what he had done was extraordinary. To him, it was just the right thing to do when good people needed help." Maria's voice grew stronger as she reached the heart of her message. "But that's exactly what makes him and all the Phantom Ranch veterans true heroes. They risked everything not for glory or recognition, but because they understood that excellence in their work meant other people got to go home to their families. They chose to be excellent when excellence was dangerous." The ceremony continued, with individual recognitions for each Phantom Ranch veteran, whether living or deceased. Maria watched as families received presidential commendations that had been written decades earlier, but never awarded. She saw tears in the eyes of hardened Special Operations veterans as they finally had the opportunity to thank the civilian contractors who had kept them alive during impossible missions. When the formal ceremony concluded, Maria found herself surrounded by people who wanted to share their own stories about Carlos Santos. A retired master sergeant told her about a mission in Bosnia, where her father had crawled through a minefield to recover communications equipment that was critical for calling in medical evacuation. A former Navy SEAL described how Carlos had stayed awake for 3 days straight to maintain surveillance equipment during a hostage rescue operation. Each story added another layer to Maria's understanding of her father's legacy. He hadn't just saved General Harrison's team in Iraq. He had been saving people throughout his career. One mission at a time, one perfect repair at a time. As the evening wore on, Maria realized that learning about her father's heroism had changed more than just her understanding of the past. It had changed her understanding of her own potential and responsibility. She was no longer just a mechanic doing a job, she was the daughter of a hero, carrying forward a tradition of excellence that had literally saved lives. The faded patch that had started this journey now hung in a place of honor in her apartment, next to the official commendation and the photographs General Harrison had given her. But the real legacy wasn't in the symbols or documents. It was in the understanding that ordinary people doing extraordinary work can change the world in ways they may never fully know. 6 months later, Maria received orders for her first deployment to a forward operating base in a classified location. As she prepared for the assignment, she thought about her father's example and the standard of excellence he had set. She wouldn't be supporting Special Operations Forces as a civilian contractor, but she would be maintaining the aircraft that brought warriors home safely. On her final day before deployment, General Harrison visited her unit to wish her well. Their conversation was brief but meaningful. "Your father would be proud of the soldier you've become, Sergeant Santos." "Thank you, sir. I've learned that the best way to honor his memory is to do my job so well that other people get to go home to their families." General Harrison smiled, remembering a young contractor who had expressed exactly the same sentiment 30 years earlier in a very different setting. As Maria boarded the transport aircraft that would take her to a deployment, she carried with her the knowledge that heroism isn't about seeking recognition or glory. True heroism is about choosing excellence when excellence matters most, even when no one is watching. It's about understanding that your work, whatever it might be, can be the thing that makes the difference between life and death for someone else. The patch on her uniform now represented not just her father's legacy, but her own commitment to carrying that legacy forward. In a world that often overlooks the quiet heroes who keep everything working, Maria Santos understood that the most important battles are won by people who simply refuse to accept anything less than perfection when other people's lives depend on their work. The aircraft lifted off into an uncertain sky, carrying Maria toward her own opportunity to serve with the same excellence her father had demonstrated in the shadows of history. The story that had begun with a faded patch on a mechanic's coveralls was continuing with a new generation, one perfect repair at a time.